Good morning, Bitcoiners. Today, day 53, Citadel Summer. This is Daniel from the Bitcoin Citadel. And today we're going to talk about the value of money, specifically the best money ever invented, Bitcoin. And I think a couple of things before we get started. In Bitcoin, or Bitcoiners, I should say, subscribe to the Austrian economics rather than the Keynesian or the Marxian economics. And in Austrian economics, some of the features of it, it's really simple, right? Is that value is subjective, right? There's no intrinsic value in things. You know, there's Marxian economics has the labor theory of value, where there's intrinsic value in things, driven by the labor that was used to create those things. In Austrian economics, I think, you know, it's more logical in that there's no intrinsic value. Value is subjective, you know. It's like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? Value is subjective. And the other key point, just to really simplify things, is that it's set on the margin, right? Just like, you know, home prices in your area, when someone is trying to find the value of your home for tax purposes, for example, they look at homes that have sold recently in the area that are comparable to yours, right? So value is set at the margin and value is subjective. With that said, the price of Bitcoin right now, of a single Bitcoin, in August of 2025, we just hit an all-time high last night. We came back a little bit. So the spot price of a Bitcoin today is around 122,000 US trash tokens, US dollars, right? And that price is set every time a Bitcoin transaction occurs, every time there's a sale on the spot market. Let's look at, so that's the current price of a Bitcoin. That's the value of a Bitcoin in the market, the spot market. How is that price set in people's minds? I would suggest that the human mind, the human psychology is genetically wired up to value scarcity. So scarce items, and I saw there was a great rip on TFTC about this fairly recently. It was awesome. I thought it was really great how human evolution was tied to this disposition to value scarce items, right? The psychology is, scarce things are awesome. I want more of them, especially if they're beautiful. So an aesthetic, we're pleased. We find value in scarce items. There's nothing more scarce in the world than Bitcoin, other than your own time here, right? So Bitcoin, the most scarce item in the world, and therefore, if we use Austrian economics and human evolutionary biology, the most valuable item. So there's one thing. Bitcoin, the Bitcoin network, right, is protected by the energy that goes into Bitcoin mining. Now, I like the way Dhruv Bansal, he's one of the founders of Unchained Capital. I love his market model of the layers in the Bitcoin network. And in his model, there's a layer zero of Bitcoin. Usually people talk about layer one of Bitcoin, and that's involves Bitcoin mining. But he breaks it down, and I think it's a distinction worth making, that there's really two markets in the Bitcoin mining, the mining part of the Bitcoin network, right? So in his model, layer 0 is the market for the Bitcoin reward, right? And all of the Bitcoin miners collectively bid on that. There's one order in the book, and that's that reward, right? Bid on that reward with the electricity that they use to mine Bitcoin, right? So the market, the buyer is providing electrical energy, and the seller, the Bitcoin network, is releasing Bitcoin every 10 minutes and providing the reward and the transaction fees to the buyer, which is the entire Bitcoin network, right? And the bid that they provide is the energy that they use to mine Bitcoin, right? So that's the layer 0 of the Bitcoin network. The reward, actually the transaction fees don't come into this market. It's just the reward. So right now, 3.125 Bitcoin is the reward for every block that's mined. Layer 1 is the transaction market. And the bidder in this case is the Bitcoiner who wants to put in a transaction, right? So you're bidding, that's where transaction fees come from, right? So you're bidding on the transaction to get your transaction into a block. And the miner who won layer 0, the reward, gets to get the fees for layer 1. So when I put my however many sats per VByte from my transaction to get it into a block, the miner that won the layer 0, or his bid was accepted for layer 0, is the one who gets to sets up the order book for layer 1, which is all of the transactions that are going to go into that block that was won on layer 0. Does that make sense? Right? So, and that miner who wins the block gets the reward for layer 0, and then also gets the transaction fees for layer 1, right? So it's all about energy, right? For getting both of those rewards, the block reward and the transaction fees, right? It's all about your bid for energy. And right now, I think the total amount of energy in the Bitcoin network this year will be, I think it's 173 terahash. It's the highest it's ever been. If you look at the price of Bitcoin and the amount of energy that's going into protecting the Bitcoin network and going into this layer 0 and layer 1 market and Dhruv Bansal's market model, it's higher than it's ever been. So the per Satoshi cost, right now, for a single Satoshi, I looked it up on Perplexity this morning, right? And it was like, I can't even remember. It was pretty huge though. It was like 10 terahash. It was big, right? So I asked Perplexity. I said, if we extrapolate out from now what the bid in the layer 0 network, right, is going to be, that energy in layer 0 from today to 2040 at the end of the 8th epoch, when there's less than 1% of the Bitcoin, there's a small amount of Bitcoin that are left. The block reward is going to go down from where it is today at 3.125 Bitcoin all the way down to, let's cut that in half. So in 2028, it's going to cut down to, half of 3.125, and then it's going to cut down in half again. So it's going to be about 7.77 Bitcoin for the block reward, each 10 minutes. So let's extrapolate that to a single Satoshi. The amount of energy in a single Satoshi is going to be more than, I think it's 40 times as much for a single Satoshi, right? The energy that it will take to basically purchase a single Satoshi will be 40 times as much. So one of the ways we can think about that is that the value of each Satoshi is going to be 40x, right? 40x. If we go all the way out to the end of the Bitcoin release cycle in 2140, it's not even, it's going to be less than a single Satoshi in a block reward. You know what I mean? the block reward is trending to zero. And the amount of energy that's necessary to mine a block is trending toward infinity, right? So think of the value of a single Satoshi using this model in 2140 for those last few Satoshis, right? It's trending toward infinity. That's pretty crazy, isn't it? I mean, let's bring it back into the analog world, into the real world. The best money, the comparison that we have to Bitcoin is always gold, right? Because gold is the most scarce item, and it's the most, it lasts forever. It's like Bitcoin in that, right? It doesn't rust. It doesn't fall apart. When you mine gold and refine it, and you put all of that energy into finding it and extracting the ore and refining it and creating gold bars out of it, or jewelry, or whatever it is you create out of it, right? That's comparable to the energy that in the Bitcoin network we put into mining Bitcoin. And we have this beautiful scarce item, this gold. And since we're wired up to value scarcity, gold has always been considered one of the most valuable things in the world, right? So similarly to Bitcoin, there's a lot of energy that needs to go into acquiring gold, to creating it in its final form, the shiny, bricks, that we keep in central banks. But it's never, I mean, it's always going to be, it's about the same amount of energy that it takes to make a gold bar now than it was in 1900. It hasn't changed that much. The process has not improved that much. The process to find gold has improved incrementally. Maybe the process to refine gold has improved incrementally, but that stuff was pretty well sorted out, 100 years ago or more. It hasn't changed that much, as opposed to Bitcoin, where the cost of getting each Satoshi, each Bitcoin in that layer zero market increases exponentially over time, right? So the value of gold denominated in US dollars has gone up, but it really is, has been fairly constant. The value of Bitcoin is not the same. Bitcoin is infinitely scarce. After 2140, there's no more Bitcoin that's coming into the market, right? The entire supply has been released. The energy that it takes to mine a Bitcoin, to win that layer zero reward, trends toward infinity as well. So we have a resource that's becoming more and more scarce, down to zero, and the energy that it takes to win that reward trends up to infinity, right? That's crazy, isn't it? So here's the last thing I want to say about this before I leave you and say, anyways, peace, right? In some way, the Satoshis that we purchase now, or for people lucky enough, the whole Bitcoins that you acquire and hold, they have that value already, because Bitcoin is a time machine for your energy, for the value you bring to the world, your time and energy. You purchase Bitcoin. That's the money that you use to store your time and energy that you've received for the value that you've brought to this world, right? In some way, because Bitcoin is a time machine, right, for your time and energy, that Bitcoin is already informed by the value of those last Satoshis that are going to be mined in 2140. And when I asked Perplexity about what the, I had it give me a table of how much energy is going into the Bitcoin network now. What is the release schedule? How much, and what's the energy value of a single Satoshi in 2025? Show me all the way out to 2040, and it did. Then I asked it to extrapolate that same table and give me the row for 2140, and guess what? It couldn't do it, right? Because the energy that's going to be put into the Bitcoin network to bid on those final Satoshis was so much, right? And the Satoshis were so few that it couldn't give me an answer, because the value of those last Bitcoin that are going to be released into the layer 0 market, to use Dhruv's model, was so high. The value of those Satoshis was so much. And in some way, not insignificant, this isn't woo-woo, right? In some way, that value informs the Bitcoin that you hold right now. And all you need to do is hold that Bitcoin. I think it's cool to, if you want to experiment with some of your stack, if you have a big enough stack, to try and, we're in the S curve now. If you want to hold on to as much Bitcoin as you can, and you do that by taking a loan out against your Bitcoin, and you're careful, and you can use Strike Bill Pay and not have to use any of your Satoshis, and just use fiat trash tokens to fund your life now, to get Satoshis, take a loan out against them, and fund your life and make that happen. That's a risk, because you might get liquidated, right? But you also might not have to spend those Satoshis. You're going to spend trash tokens that you borrow rather than Satoshis that you've put your time and energy into. And if you think of the value of those Satoshis, I'm just a hodler. I just acquire and try to hold, right? And try to hold in the most secure way that I can. And I try to find a community of like-minded Bitcoiners that I can trust. I don't trust the government, but in some, fundamentally, you have to have a community that you can trust, right? Because we're not going to get through this thing alone. I don't think even Mark Zuckerberg is going to get through this thing alone. And he's a Bitcoiner now. And I just read about his ranch in Kauai, right? He's preparing for doomsday. He's actually probably preparing for the Phoenix event in 2040, right? Big underground bunker, trying to ride out the Phoenix. But that's another story. That's a Simulation Sunday story, right? Do you get what I'm saying, though? In some way, and even if you don't want to go to 2140, in some way, the Bitcoin that you're holding now is worth, it's informed by the value of Bitcoin in 2040, when there's 40 times as much energy going into production, or the layer 0 market for every single Satoshi. 40 times as much as there is now, right? So just think of where Bitcoin is now for spot price, and you can think of what the spot price will be in 2040. And I guarantee you it's going to be at least 40x what it is now. That's my prediction anyway. But I'm a Josh man. Whenever anyone asks me what's the price by the end of 2025, I say Josh man said 444. That's what I'm saying, right? Because Josh man is the oracle, isn't he? Or he made a really, really lucky guess. Anyway, that's today's show. I will talk to you tomorrow. If you've gotten this far and you want to give me a like, you want to give me a subscribe, you want to get notified when these videos drop, and it's every single day around 8 a.m. Eastern time, not always, but around, right? Do that. I love comments. That's my favorite thing. So if you give me a like or a subscribe, that's awesome. I love that. But comments are my favorite thing. So if you get this far and you want to comment on this, I wanted to come up with a kind of a mind-blowing idea for people who are new to Bitcoin or just haven't thought about this aspect of the value of this money, the best money ever created, Bitcoin. and maybe give people a taste of Austrian economics if they haven't run into that before. That's what this video is about. Anyway, I will talk to you tomorrow, as I just said a minute ago. Peace.